This is the RPG Crawler, and it is time, once again, for another Shelf of Many Things. This time, I'm taking a look at one that was recommended to me by a viewer. It's by MacLeod, called Heroes and Monsters Fantasy Adventure Game. It's a rules-lite system that uses the Black Hack First Edition as its core, at least I assume so. I've already reviewed the first edition of the Black Hack, and I haven't actually taken a look at the second edition of the Black Hack. This reminds me of the first edition, so I'm going to assume it's from the first edition. Regardless, Heroes and Monsters seeks to compile the Black Hack rules with everything that you need for a basic, old-school dungeon crawl-focused game, all in one neat package. Now, MacLeod, and I believe I'm pronouncing that right, has a number of different games using different systems as a base, so don't be surprised if I do end up taking a look at another of his offerings in the future, but for now, let's focus on this one. Here's where I usually talk about the build quality, but before I get into this, I have a few comments, ones that I hope will excuse some of the visuals. Now, I picked this one up on Amazon, and it appears to be one of those print-on-demand sort of books, and normally I have no problem with them. Indeed, this one was comfortable in the hand. In fact, it's still comfortable in the hand, extremely easy to read. However, even just a single read-through left the covers hopelessly curled, and it's not like I was setting these things up. I've been trying to flatten it for days now. It's not falling apart at the seams or anything, but it is very much like cheap paperback territory on the cover. So keep that in mind. The book itself is about 92 pages with a relatively small form factor, which is good. The cover is full color. The interior is largely single column interspersed with black and white line art and tables. Most of the illustrations appear to be pretty stock. I've seen many of them in other OSR games. If you're looking for a relatively complete physical volume that you can just toss into a bag and go with, however, it's very pleasantly situated for that. It's available in PDF format as well for a much lower price. So if you prefer the digital or if you're just on a budget, there is that option as well. In terms of contents, Heroes and Monsters is broken into 7 chapters and an appendix. First is your standard introductory chapter, then character rules, equipment lists, rules of play, magic and spells, monsters, and finally adventure information, while the appendix covers some alternate classes. Heroes and Monsters Introduction does a fairly good job of covering the standard talk of explaining what role-playing is, what to expect, some basic terms, and then the need for dice and paper, as well as the core mechanics of the game. It uses the Black Hack system's idea of most things being based on ability score tests, of a d20 or lower on a character's particular ability score, and the insistence on keeping all of the rolls to the player, with the DM really rarely rolling any dice at all. It's a pretty nice system, honestly, and I do like it in that regard. There's also the concept of advantage and disadvantage, which seems lifted directly from 5th edition and is the same as it is in the Black Hack 1st edition. Character creation is generally point buy, with the classic 6 stats of strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dexterity, and charisma, with points simply assigned linearly to end up with an array of stats from 7 to 15. There's no need for various ability score adjustments, since everything is handled as a test versus an ability score. Alignments are covered with Heroes and Monsters using the order, neutrality, chaos arrangement, and then classes are covered. There are the standard 4 of fighter, cleric, thief, and magic user, with demi-human classes of elf, dwarf, and halfling. Each class has a description, starting hit points, a flat hit point gain per level, a die to use to gain hit points when resting, weapons and armor that are allowed, attack damage since it's handled on a class-by-class basis rather than weapons, and then any special features or special rules that the class has, such as spellcasting. It finishes up with rules for leveling up that particular character class. The chapter finishes up with details such as starting gold for equipment and languages, as well as other cosmetic details. The equipment chapter starts with details on coin conversion, as well as a simplified encumbrance rule for basic dungeon crawling use. Equipment largely follows base Black Hack rules. Weapons don't necessarily have their own damage ratings, since damage is dealt based on character class. Rather, each class of weapon is divided into light, medium, and heavy, melee, and ranged weapons. Each class of weapon simply has an adjustment that applies to both the attack and damage rating, making larger weapons harder to use but also do more damage on a hit. Armor is only divided into 3 simple categories, with armor points functioning as damage reduction, except in the case of shields, which make attacks more difficult to land on the character. Heroes and Monsters also retains usage dice for specific numbers of gear, so using a particular type of expendable item means that dice are rolled, and on a particularly low roll, the dice is stepped down to the next step in a chain until the item can't be reduced anymore, in which case it's just expended. Rules of Play is by far the largest chapter, covering the basic stat tests as the core rule, and then going into saving throws and telling what stats to check for each time of quest. There's rules for various crit fails and crit successes, then discussion of various other combat rules. Heroes and Monsters uses a sort of two-tier scale similar to many old-school games in terms of time, with moments for combat and minutes for exploration turns. The characters may take an action and move during their turn, and distance and ranges are abstracted out to simply categories like close, nearby, far away. Initiative is simplified, and there are rules for executing an ambush and handling various damage from types of weapons. Monsters likewise have a singular damage die, defined for the most part simply based on its hit dice. There's rules for fighting other players and handling small hordes of monsters, as well as more powerful individual monsters, as well as a few other situations that might rise up during combat. The chapter continues by addressing random encounters and creature reactions, dealing with character death, resting, and healing, and then covering experience and gaining levels. Of note is that dying is simplified, with characters simply being knocked out, and if they're still knocked out at the end of the combat, then you roll against a table to see what happens to them. Experience is simply boiled down to a sort of milestone system, where characters take a certain number of game sessions to advance instead of tracking specific experience, and some classes taking an extra session to account for being more powerful. Leveling up mostly consists of gaining hit points and a chance to boost stats based on the class. Magic and spells follow, and the spell system in Heroes and Monsters consists of a sort of hybrid system where spells can be cast directly from a spellbook or memorized to cast without the spellbook. There are slots per day which are expended like spell slots in 5th edition to cast any spell that you have available, but then there's a test after each spell is cast, and if the test is a success, the slot isn't actually expended after all, which makes spells actually potentially far more common. Spells are divided into cleric and magic user / elf spells, and then by level, with each spell simply having a name and a very, very brief description of what it does, sort of a callback to the original white box method of spell descriptions. The Monsters chapter is similarly simple. It goes into damage dice based on monster hit dice chart, and then covers a few specific types of monsters with blanket special effects over the entire type. The rest of the chapter is then a list of monsters ordered by hit die. Each monster consists only of a name, a number of hit dice, and then any special attacks or features that that particular monster has. This allows for a large number of monsters to be represented in just a few pages. The section on adventuring basically covers some more advice on running adventures in Heroes and Monsters as well as playing the game. There's an example of play, some ideas for creating adventures and campaigns, some guidelines for creating higher level characters, as well as some basic dungeon crawling rules that are mostly just fluff to create dungeons reminiscent of older school dungeons. There's rules for treasure, as well as a very few examples of magic items that you might create. They don't go into a lot of detail, and to be honest, the basic treasure guidelines look like they're copy-pasted from something else, since at least in the version that I'm reviewing, they go on to show about earning experience by getting treasure, but they don't actually use experience in this game. Anyway, the appendix in the back of the book covers some variant demi-human classes. Dwarves that are fighter / priest, for instance, or gnomes. They're fully fleshed out classes akin to the ones in the front of the book, and to be honest, I'm wondering why they didn't just put them in the front of the book. So aside from the few odd oversights and errors, I'd have to say that Heroes and Monsters is an excellent rules-lite system, which I honestly would have put in there with a core black hack system. It's easy to learn and quick to pick up, and the unified mechanic that serves as really the primary rule that you need to learn is easy enough to adapt to a number of old-school style adventures that may already be out there. Technically speaking, it's only designed to accommodate characters of up to level 10, but the level up mechanic is simple enough that you can actually carry it all the way through higher levels. I have to admit that I would have liked some more examples of magic items to use within the game, since it's different enough that some of the old school ideas for things may not completely fit appropriately, but the overall system is simple enough that I feel someone could figure it out. The fact that it has appropriate classes and races bundled in the main rules is a bonus, while the compatibility with the original Black Hack system means that there's a lot of other systems based on the same thing that could cannibalize, basically, for material. All in all, it's yet another well-put-together rules-lite RPG, suitable for a quick play with a dungeon-crawling theme. And while those seem to be a dime a dozen nowadays, this one is well put together, easy to read, and understandable all in all, which is surprisingly rare sometimes. The aforementioned compatibility with the Black Hack works in its favor this time, as it sets Heroes and Monsters apart from the generic D&D clones that seem to be crowding the market a lot, while not going so far out that you have to totally reinvent the wheel for anything that you might want to add from the Black Hack system. Sometimes being the same old is not too bad. For a basic dungeon crawling style game, it should do just fine. At the very least, it's got me interested in the author's other works as well. And on that note, I'm going to leave it here. As always, I'll put links to where you can buy a copy in the description below. For now, this has been the RPG Crawler with my shelf of many things, heroes, and monsters. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you're still watching this far, I'd like to take a moment to thank those who have supported this channel via Patreon or direct donations throughout the years, without which this channel could not have lasted as long as it has. For those who are feeling particularly generous, you can still support my work through Patreon and now through Subscribestar as well, through the links in the description below.